Well, thanks very much, Aaron, and good morning. We'll jump to the weather here we'll talk about. It seems like a lot of the same themes that we talked about last week are, and starting with another frost freeze event here this morning, another chilly start to the day. Temperature, although I would say it's probably important to note today, not quite as large an aerial extent of area impacted today as there was a week ago, last Thursday, but. We do have temperatures as low. The lowest I've seen so far is 26 up in central upper Michigan, but there were several areas in northern lower Michigan where we also have some freezing temperatures here this morning. And the real saving grace on the right hand side here, looking at some 5-minute air temperatures and wind speeds. The big difference today was that we still had some breeze at many areas. Now, the site you see here is from our EnviroWeather site at Hawks, up in northeastern lower Michigan, and you can see the wind, which is on the bottom, the blue, the darker blue there. It does die off here in the last, and that was the key because the air mass that's over us right now is very, very or unusually dry, low dew points, low humidity, and that's one of the factors at night when we see radiational cooling take place off the surface that really allows the temperature to fall further than it would otherwise. But for most areas, especially in lower Michigan, we're talking about mid and upper 30s to near 40 with a little bit of breeze, but definitely a cool start for the day. Looking at the last week here, we actually averaged out pretty close to the normal for mean temperatures here on the left, and that ranged from a degree or two cooler than normal across the eastern lower peninsula to a degree or two warmer in the western lower and across most of upper Michigan. So fairly close to evening out where we should be. The big news, without question here on the right-hand side, our precipitation has been below normal now for several weeks, and last week was a good example. So we had one event. There were two events, actually a smaller one up in the Upper Peninsula here a couple days ago, back on Tuesday. But in general, last Friday's event was the only precip we saw in the weekend. You can see with the totals here, some areas were very fortunate and picked up a half, some cases in a northern lower and up in the upper part of upper Michigan, almost 3/4 of an inch. And you can also see some half-inch totals here across southeastern lower. Those are the areas that did the best with that Friday rainfall. But note that in between, from west central up into northeastern lower Michigan, there's a large area that had little or no precip. And again, for May is one of our wetter months here climatologically. It's not common to see that happen, but it has. And not only that, it's happened now for a couple of weeks of certainly drier than normal conditions. The normal guidance that we look at here with soil moisture incredibly is not available, especially given what's taking place right now. I'm using a different map here, graphic this morning. This one, it's still looking, unfortunately, I wanted to get one that showed topsoil moisture, which we normally would have, but wasn't available. But this one shows the whole profile down to 5 feet. It's from NOAA's Climate Prediction Center. But I think it basically tells the story that needs to be told here. And that is that we started out the season in almost all the state with, well, as we typically do, close to field capacity with lots of moisture in the ground. But given the dry weather of the last several weeks, we have rapidly depleted what's in the top part of the profile, especially the top foot and a half. There's moisture certainly still at depth. It's the beginning of the growing season. We haven't had that extraction unless you've got wheat out there, but it's just a situation where the topsoils have rapidly declined. And you can see the beginning of that here. This is the change, the graphic you're looking at here, looking at soil moisture changes just since the end of April. And again, across almost all of the Great Lakes region, the upper Midwest and the Eastern Corn Belt, we've seen fairly significant or rapid declines in moisture. So that again goes without saying, the topsoils are unusually dry for this time of the year. So looking ahead, what are we dealing with here? The big question, and I'm going to use the upper air here because it's just it is the factor. And looking at the forecast for the next 5 days of the jet stream flow across North America, and you can see this big upside down big ridging feature right over the upper Midwest and the Great Lakes region, including Michigan. And that's a slam dunk for, well, you've got sinking air underneath that ridge. and we're going to see basically the most important thing, dry conditions. They're very, very dry conditions. It's hard to get moisture into a situation like that. The other one is that we're going to definitely see an increase in temperatures here as time goes on. We have a Canadian origin high pressure system over us right now. We'll talk about that in just a second, but that's not here for the long haul. That's just basically we're going to see that move off to the east in the next 36, 48 hours. And then a very noticeable and distinct warming trend in the next week, and we'll go back to above normal. That's a direction. It is important to say too that these big features that you see here they're not uncommon, but we typically don't see things stalling or staying in the same place for very long during the spring season and the fall season. The same thing happens, but that has been the case a lot of this spring, and this pattern that you see here probably is going to be locked in for at least the next week, probably longer than that. So that's something to keep in mind here as we look at the forecast. Well, here's the map for this morning, and the Canadian high pressure I talked about. It's up here over northeastern Ontario, the center of it. You can see very little or no green color on here. There's no precip. It's a very dry, cool air mass, but it is going to gradually and slowly move off to the south and east here over the next day. We're not going to talk about much in the way of precipitation at all. Really, the only change is going to be the temperature. Tonight, with this dry air mass, and again, some of the dew points in this air mass are down in the upper 20s, we will see the threat once again of frost and freezing temperatures overnight. These are forecast low temperatures for tomorrow morning. Right now, this is the official National Weather Service forecast. You can see mostly in the low to mid 30s in the north and then the upper 30s in the south. But if you do see clearing and calm conditions, and I think we will see some areas that do that, like you saw Hawks here a little bit ago, for this morning, we will see certainly the threat of frost. And then if low-lying areas were cold air ponds, you probably see some areas below freezing. Again, I think strong likelihood of that tomorrow, but that should be it for this air mass before it moves off to the east. Here's the weather map, and you can look at that big H right over west central lower Michigan, and that's typically where you see the most clear, calm conditions are in the vicinity of that. So look for probably some frost and freeze advisors, or at least a mention of it in the forecast once again here tonight. By Friday, the center of the high you can see moves off to the lower lakes, and we begin an earnest or a warming trend here in earnest. Certainly, actually, it'll be noticeable even tomorrow, but certainly on Saturday. And so, whereas we will be looking for only 60s for high temperatures today across Michigan, we'll be up closer to 70 tomorrow, and then well into the 70s by Saturday. And looking beyond that, no sign of any precipitation at this point into next week because of that upper air ridge that I talked about. But the other major factor here, we will see noticeable warming, be above 80 again by the beginning of the week for most of the state. And right now, I would call maybe mid or even upper 80s by the middle of next week. So big switch from cooler than normal right now to warmer than normal by the early part of next week. We could even, it's possible, especially with the dry landscape, we could even see some max temperatures the middle of next week that approach 90. So big change there. And again, there's just nothing in the way of a system to produce any rainfall before at least the latter part of next week, and probably longer than that. That's just right now what the guidance is all pointing in that same direction. The forecast precipitation totals here for the next 7 days, you can see, are very, very meager. And we don't see maps like this very often looking out a week in our part of the world, but you can see for almost all of the Eastern Corn Belt and then up into the Great Lakes area, there's virtually no color here. The little precipitation that we do see there, that would be, if that comes, that would be probably towards the middle of next week. But right now, again, based on the forecast products that we look at, there's nothing really major to suggest any change really before at least a week and a half. And as we look here at the one other thing, it goes without saying, we talked about this last week as well. Given very, very warm temperatures coming, low humidities, given strong sunshine, very few clouds, our potential rates of evapotranspiration are going to remain at well elevated, or actually very, very high rates for May. Now, note, this variable potential of evapotranspiration, you got to remember that word potential. This is not what's going to evaporate from a surface. This, remember, is a reference. It's a grass-covered surface. And the important thing about that grass-covered surface as a reference is it has no limitation for water. There's not much in Michigan or the Great Lakes region right now that can say that. Most of us are depleted. And of course, when we don't have the water, that rate of actual evapotranspiration falls down rapidly. But it also indicates the potential for stress for any vegetation there that's trying to extract water from the ground and deal with the atmospheric demand. What this says is that the atmospheric demand in this period is going to be unusually high. Once again, these are actually very, very high levels for the middle of the summer that we don't see very often, approaching 1/4 of an inch per day. That's the reference value, something but the demand for water from the atmosphere to evaporate, very, very, very high for this time of the year. So if you have irrigation, it's one of these unusual situations where you really have to really seriously consider taking advantage of that. Of course, many folks with dry land or rain-fed systems, they can't do this, but this is a factor because, again, the odds of precipitation over the next 1 to 1.5 weeks at this point in time are very, very low. Now, in the medium range forecast guidance, I think the question becomes, well, how long can this pattern last? And then on the lower left-hand side here, looking at that jet stream pattern, you can see not much difference from what we saw earlier here. Big ridge over the middle of the country, and not surprisingly, much warmer than normal mean temperatures on the upper right-hand side here. And of course, along with that, drier than normal conditions. Both the 6 to 10 day and to some extent, mostly the 8 to 14 day outlooks are similar in this. Warm and dry is where they are. And so the big question is, how long can that upper air pattern last? There are definitely hints that during the second week of June, we see maybe a major reversal or some kind of a change. And it's far out at this point in time with much less confidence. But I think that's the next real chance that we have to see something different. And interestingly, the guidance that we do have, it suggests that we may flip-flop, and the big ridge builds out over across the western part of the U.S., and we replace in the east and the central part of the U.S. with a big trough. So we could go, that's at least what the guidance is suggesting, that we move to a much cooler type of regime by that second week in June. But for now, for the next 1 to 2 weeks, we are looking at warm and dry, and very, very, very high likelihood of that occurring. Last thing here are new long lead outlooks that were issued by NOAA's Climate Prediction Center. There's some change in these versus what we've seen in the last couple of issuances or last couple of months. First, with the new forecast for the month of June on the top here, you can see that Michigan is in the area of equal chances with no color on either mean temperatures or precipitation totals. That's a change. We had been trending warmer and wetter than normal for previous issues of the forecast, so they've backed off. I think some of that is a direct result of what you just saw with the medium range forecast guidance. It's certainly for the beginning of the month, which looks really, really warm and dry, then followed by a change after that. The adjusted or the new outlook for June, July, and August, the summer months here, temperature has also backed off. It's now equal chances. It was normal to above normal, but on the precipitation here in the lower right, we see normal to above normal precipitation totals. That is consistent with many of the last several issuances for the summer, but it's the only piece it is. The others have been adjusted. And in the lower left-hand corner, I think most people have probably heard this in the news, but we are rapidly moving towards an El Nino situation in the equatorial Pacific. Likely here in the next couple of months, we'll hear official word that yes, that's taken place, but it's not going to impact our weather. Probably not much of an impact. Certainly not anytime soon. It'll be a factor possibly later in the year, and as we look, we'll keep track of that. But the outlooks have shifted a little bit more towards a no direction type of forecast. And so wrapping up here, weather-wise, really more of the same is what we're dealing with, especially with regard to water and precipitation. Virtually no precipitation in the forecast for at least a week and possibly longer than that. And also at the same time, a distinct warming trend to above normal, even much above normal, probably by the latter part of next week. So we are looking at certainly some early summer weather. There's going to be issues early on with our agriculture. It will be great for harvesting that first cut forage, almost perfect conditions for that. And one of the times you can cut hay and probably not a care in the world about it being rained on, because it just isn't going to happen here over the next several days. But on the other hand, of course, we still have planting to do. There's still more, and of course what we have planted, herbicide activation. There's a number of issues too with the lack of water. So that is likely again, the problem with the lack of precipitation, very, very likely to be at least another week to a week and a half. And I'll stop there and turn it back. Oh, no, I'm not going to stop there. I need to introduce our next week's speaker. That's Dr. James DeDecker, who's the director of the MSU Upper Peninsula Research and Extension Center. And James is going to be with us to talk about wildlife management in field crops. That's next Thursday at our virtual breakfast.